Is that all okay with you? Right. Hello and welcome everybody to our third and final webinar on international higher education. This session focuses on the curriculum perspective and features presenters from the Asia Pacific region. I'm John von Knorring, founder and president of Stylus Publishing. Today I'm happy to introduce, well, before I introduce you, I'm happy to introduce Hans de Wit, Betty Leask, Wendy Green, Tracy Zou, and Ly Tran, co-editors and contributors of the second edition of the Handbook of International Higher Education. Just before I go on and hand this over to, just let you know, this book was published in December. It's a co-publication of Stylus and AIEA, the Association of International Education Administrators. AIEA is also a co-host of this webinar series, so I thank you and welcome all AIE members who have joined us today. Before I pass this on to Hans, I just thought I'd let you see, I'll share a copy of a slide of the book, which has a discount code in it. I'll put this in the chat at the end of the session, but I'll put this up in the meantime, so that if you happen to leave early and unable to see this, it'll be in the chat. So if you wish to order this book, use the code INED25. You can either go to styluspub.com or go to our distributor Eurospan, who covers the world outside North America. So I will just leave this up here a second. So if you want to note that down, as I say, I'll put this in the chat, and I'll show this slide again at the very end of the session.
Great. Thank you, John.
So without further ado, I pass it on to Hans de Wit.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining. It's the morning of the Asia Pacific region. It's in the late evening in Amsterdam, midnight almost, and still in the early evening on the 8th of March in North America. So everybody welcome from different time zones, but we focus on the Asia Pacific region. And this session is recorded and will be available later and circulated around to those who have registered. This is the third webinar on the Handbook of International Education, the second edition, which I was co-editing with Betty Leask, Dara Dierdorf, and Harvey Charles for the Association of International Education Administrators. And as you can see from this copy, it's a very thick book covering a lot of aspects of internationalization of higher education, and dealing both with the historical development, with the current situation, but also looking at the future of internationalization of higher education. And Tracy is one of the presenters today, was one of those who are looking at the future with several other colleagues. We of course know that internationalization of higher education, like higher education itself, is very contextualized and both in locations and types of institutions, but also in time. And the handbook was written at the start of the, well, finalized, I should better say, the start of the pandemic. So we have not completely been able to cover, but still looking at some of the aspects of what the impact of the pandemic was. And of course, we also have not been able at all to cover the geopolitical tensions that are very present today in the world, in particular currently with the brutal invasion of Russia into the Ukraine, and our solidarity with the Ukrainian people and our academic colleagues in the Ukraine, but also with those academics and scholars and oppositions in Russia is very strong today. And we unfortunately will foresee that it will have serious implications for the future of higher education and its internationalization. But that is something which we will not be able to really predict, but have to address anyway. We today will focus on, in particular, the very important aspect of internationalization of the curriculum and teaching and learning, which is ample addressed into the handbook. The whole traditional focus of internationalization as being mobility focused has been drastically changed, and we have a lot of experts developing now much more the internationalization of the curriculum, internationalization at home, and I'm very pleased with our current presenters, Wendy Green and Tracy and Ly Tran and Betty Leask, that they will all be there. So Tracy Zou, and Betty, who was both co-editor but also is a leading expert on internationalization of the curriculum. We start this session with Wendy Green, and then we have Tracy Zou. Wendy will speak much more from the student experience perspective. Tracy Zou will talk about the communities of practices, and then Ly Tran will look into what does internationalization curriculum mean in a specific context, in this case, the Vietnamese context, and then Betty will give a more paradigm overview of what global learning for all internationalization curriculum in the new context will mean. So each of them will speak around 8 minutes, and then we hope to have questions. So feel free to put questions in the chat or in the Q&A box under, and then we will address them in the second part of our webinar. Wendy, can I give the floor to you?
Sure, thanks, Hans. Okay, I'll share my screen. Sorry, yes, coming now. Okay, well, hello everyone. I'm Wendy Green. I'm from the University of Tasmania. And in the chapter that I'm going to be talking about today, we focus on a particular approach to deepening students' engagement in international education. That approach is now commonly known as Students as Partners, or SAP. So, what is SAP? Okay, there are, of course, a number of definitions, but I think the most essential thing about Students as Partners is that it reconceptualizes students as co-agents in their own learning. So co-agents along with all other stakeholders in the university, staff, faculty, administrators, and the outside community. The focus with partnership is very much on the process of engagement and the quality of engagement. And the aim is to ensure that all partners, all students included, are considered to be able to make contributions of equal value to whatever is being undertaken. And this can be, and it has been and is being applied in all aspects of university life. So in our chapter, we really conceptualize curriculum in a very holistic way. So it really encompasses the formal curriculum, the co-curriculum, questioning the hidden curriculum, and it's, wherever learning can take place. So it could be on campus, on the home campus, or abroad in times when travel, of course, is possible. Okay, so in our chapter, we refer through this, there's a number of examples of this practice in different contexts that are sprinkled throughout the chapter. And as well as that, we've included 3 case studies which give a little bit more of an in-depth look at particular examples of partnerships in different cultural geographic locations, with different types of students for different purposes. So the first one we refer to is comes from Malaysia, and it's a partnership between the Postgraduate Student Office, international students and faculty. And together they worked to co-design a new international student transition and support program. The second example comes from the Netherlands. And in that project, the idea was to involve a whole range of diverse student voices in the design and implementation of a large institution-wide international classroom project. The third example comes from the US, and this was a student-led project. So it initially was initiated by one international student who then gathered around her in a partnership a number of other students, faculty, and international office staff, and together they designed a day to celebrate the linguistic diversity on campus, and that has now become an annual event. Okay, so there have been a number, this is, I should say, a very new practice. The first publications came out around 2014, 15, 16. And since then, it has really developed into quite a movement across the globe. But there are some critical questions that arose fairly quickly and still remain critical now. The first is, how inclusive is SAP as a practice? So when the first reviews of the early literature came out, it was very clear that there was a strong tendency for these partnerships to further cement privilege. They were doing this because staff were partnering with students that were most able, so most academically and financially able, the sort of students that we know volunteer or are selected for co-curricular and enrichment activities. Now, since then, in the past few years, there has been a growing recognition of this as a problem, and there have been a whole range of partnerships that have been designed to specifically to be more inclusive, for example, by targeting minority students. The second big critical question is around how this concept might translate across cultures. So it did originate in the Anglophone sphere in response to particular conditions, cultural and so on conditions in those universities. So this is an important question. I think it's important that, you know, there's a number of concepts around education that are cultural constructs anyway. I mean, teaching and learning are cultural constructs. The role of teachers and students are cultural constructs. And we need to become a lot more sensitive to that. With partnership, a number of very exciting partnership projects have developed in a whole range of non-Anglophone countries in the last few years, and I think our case studies and other examples show some of that. I think what's key is that within a cultural construct, the people involved are enabled to develop the partnership in a way that's culturally authentic to that context. And when that happens, they can be very effective. So finally, in our chapter, we address the question of the pandemic, the big question of the last couple of years, and what are the implications for furthering partnership projects? Well, we know that students were suddenly, all around the globe, were suddenly confronted with huge existential, and unsettling questions, personal, social, financial, academic. There's huge impact on students. And staff and faculty in various contexts have also experienced this. So the question arises, can we expect, or can we ask students and faculty to engage in this practice, which seems and is so new, so radical in some ways, so unsettling, of old constructs when they're already confronting all these existential crises? Well, I think the answer is in practice, in what's actually been happening through the pandemic. And we can see already through publications coming out that people around the globe have seen this as a new opportunity to engage in partnerships, to redesign learning and support in this online pandemic era of education. And so, you know, all I can say in closing is we need to watch this space. I think it'll be very exciting. And with that, I'll pass it over to the next speaker.
Thank you. That will be Tracy, but thank you first to address this issue of students as partners, which I think on the one hand is, as you say, very new as a concept and approach. At the same time, it's surprising that it's new because students are the center of everything. So we should consider students as being the essential partners, and that applies certainly to internationalization of higher education. So thank you for that, and feel free again, those who are attending, to put questions or comments into the chat room for Wendy. And now I give the floor to Tracy Zou to talk about communities of practice in internationalization. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans, and thank you, Wendy. So it's a privilege to have a text box in this book chapter, one of the book chapter by Elizabeth and Betty on internationalizing the curriculum. So different from Wendy, I'm talking about staff members. So the text box I contributed is about how we supported faculty development in internationalization of the curriculum IOC across 4 institutions, 3 in Hong Kong, 1 in mainland China. Let me start from the end. This 3.5-year project funded by the Hong Kong SAR government has already ended in December 2020. So our communities of practice on IOC built from that project also ended. It's, to me, definitely heartbroken. Plus, I've moved to a new institution, now the Chinese University of Hong Kong, while the previous work was conducted mainly in University of Hong Kong. And they are similar names, but they are 2 different universities. But I do want to say, maybe that's a question for you to think about. It seems still an inevitable fate of like some project-based communities of practice, whether it is on IOC, whether it is on other important topic, that it will just end when the funding is used up. So sustainability is still an issue to me. I pointed that out in the textbook, but somehow I feel I haven't got solution. Maybe the panelists here will help me. Okay, though I said it ended, I'm still very, very proud of the work. So I don't have a slide, but I really want to show you. I'm not now sharing the website we established together with the communities of practice, and it has quite a lot of resources. Oh, another point I want to make is when I'm referring to communities of practice, I meant by a means of bringing people together and facilitating exchange and peer support. This is different from many other studies using communities of practice as a framework, a theoretical framework to analyze learning processes. So the community in our case is more tangible. We have members, we have resources built. The work, just a very brief introduction of some numbers. We've got 120 members from 7 countries, 12 completed projects, pilot projects with significant enhancement and innovation in the courses and programs. And there are changes in perceptions of IOC among 1/3 of the members since they joined us, and 80 case examples honoring good practices from our members. So I'm not just only proud of these numbers, but I really see a very better connection between our academic staff members and IOC as a concept since the communities of practice. You know, academic staff members are so busy, so heavily tasked with teaching and research duties. Before the project, when we talked about IOC, it doesn't resonate with many, but somehow after project, I see more passion and more engagement throughout my interaction with those staff members. If you ask me, maybe just one most critical success factor, I would say it is the negotiation between us academic developers located in these 4 institutions and our academics regarding what IOC is and what good IOC practices are. It could be so easy for us to just borrow best practices established by Hans, by Betty from different contexts to Hong Kong or to mainland China. But we all know from our experience, borrowing those best practices will not work. So we try to acknowledge local context and disciplinary expertise when we work with our academic colleagues. So in our project, what I'm really proud of is these briefings containing local examples, all contributed by our staff members across these 4 institutions. The questions we ask them when we talk to them is, what do you think work best in your class with your students? What do you think is an excellent global citizen in your discipline? So all these questions were openly discussed in our community, resulting in this. It's a long list. I wouldn't be able to show you all, but if you are still in, you might be interested, you could go to the website to take a look. All the case examples and the good practices and publications can be found there. So this is the most critical step. By establishing a domain of this community through negotiating the best practices and grounding it in the disciplines. Then we continue with making connections. We had a lot of join the conversation events, gathering people together, sharing practices, seeking feedback, also quite a valuable part. And the third, and then we explored some new approach, use small scale pilot project, $50,000 US dollars per project. We had 12 of them. And finally, we created opportunities for cross-boundary initiatives like supporting our faculty members to present and publish in teaching and learning conferences and journals. So finally, our international conferences on this topic attracted over 400 attendees from 28 countries. So it looks like I'm quite happy about numbers, but what I really feel important is the thoughts that we had a truly collaborative community of practice through the process. Though it ended, I hope you understand more why I felt heartbroken. And but due to limited time, I probably end here. But I'm very happy to respond to any questions. Let me stop share. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. I think this is a very also important. It sounds indeed very logical to create this kind of communities of practice in the specific context. But again, we have not done that. We have been always looking into what others are saying, as you say, and then copy it and try to see, well, does it work? But always you have to contextualize it, and that's why I think it's very good to have this kind of approach and the sources that you make available for people to work in practice into specific contexts like in Hong Kong and in mainland China. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We now go to Ly Tran and she will talk about internationalization curriculum into a concrete context of Vietnam, and I'm happy to always to have participation with Ly Tran. I mean, sometimes people tell me that I'm very productive and all over the place, but I think Ly Tran is starting to beat me by publishing and presenting and being everywhere, and even by better quality than me. So that's quite an accomplishment, and looking forward to your presentation. Ly, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Hans. thank you for such an inspiration. And there's no way that I can beat you. You're a long-lasting model for all of us. Yeah, and also thank you to Wendy and Tracy for your wonderful presentation. It's fantastic to hear about the positioning of student as partners and co-constructor of knowledge in internationalization of the curriculum, and also the community practice that Tracy shared. And now I'm walking through with you from a different perspective, and in response to Hans' highlighting of the need to look at the geopolitical perspective in international education, especially at this critical time. And let me start by sharing my screen. Can you see my screen now? Yeah. So as Hans mentioned, looking in particular at the context of Vietnam and the internationalization of the curriculum. And I would like to focus on the geopolitical perspective. And in order to have a better insight into internationalization of the curriculum in Vietnam, I think it's worthwhile to situate the topic within the broader context of international education in Vietnam. So many of you may hear about the historical and political circumstances of Vietnam, and indeed internationalization in Vietnam has been closely shaped and reshaped by the historical and political condition of the countries. And until 1990, international education in Vietnam was significantly influenced by China, France, the United States, and Russia. And in terms of the higher education model and system, higher education governance, and teaching and learning methodology, curriculum, as well as language of instruction. For instance, under the nearly 100 years colonization by the French, France were the medium of instruction in Vietnam. Like generation like my father, when they went to school, they learned French at the medium of instruction. So it's a matter of love and hatred for that generation. So you were aware of being colonized and you fought for freedom and independence, but at the same time, the exposed to a foreign language like French at that time was quite inspirational for that generation. And with the Dien Bien Phu battle in 1954, Vietnam was the first country in the world that have fought over a powerful colonizer fully equipped with modern weapons like France, and that had to lead to the ending of the French colonization in Indochina, including Laos and Cambodia as well. And with China, it's a very long historical connection with over 100 years being either occupied, invaded, or being dominated by China. And so Vietnam has been the first country in the world that used to be influenced by Chinese script and used Chinese script, romanized itself, and developed its own language system as a way to educate people, educate the mind of people about freedom and independence, and as a way to escape from Chinese domination. And then with the French withdrawal in 1955, the American came to Vietnam and occupied the south of Vietnam, while in the north of Vietnam, the country was influenced by Russia. So clearly, during that time, there were two different systems of higher education that influenced Vietnam. So the south by the US and the north by Russia. And until the reunification of the country in 1955, clearly the country geared toward more the Russian model of higher education that I will talk a little bit more in a minute. But in a nutshell, internationalization in Vietnam, including internationalization of the curriculum, occurs when Vietnam was colonized, invaded, or dominated by foreign countries. But during that time, the nation always resisted those forces in one way or another. Now, I would like to turn to the internationalization of the curriculum through the advanced program, which has been the signature program of the Vietnamese government in order to internationalize the curriculum and boost human development in Vietnam, and at the same time enhance the country regional and international integration. So the underlying principle of the advanced program is to import foreign curriculum. And you can see here is that the foreign curriculum adopted in the advanced program was mainly come from the US and UK universities, and later on from Australian university. So no longer the Russian university like the period before the advanced program, which was introduced in 2006. And the budget for the program was $40 million for the first 3 years. And again, English were used as a medium of instruction. So before the advanced program, Russia was still the main medium, the main foreign language taught in university in Vietnam, especially in northern Vietnam. And the first cohort of the advanced program was taught by foreign academics, mainly from the US, UK, and Australia, or foreign-based academics of Vietnamese origin. And later on, Vietnamese academics gradually took over the job and was mainly in charge of the teachings. This is my last slide. I would like to look at the geopolitical aspect of internationalization of the curriculum via the advanced program. So as I mentioned before, Vietnam used to be colonized, and there's a lot of colonial features in the curriculum, teaching and learning, and higher education model in Vietnam. And with the reunification of the country in 1975, the countries were committed to decolonization by being escaped from foreign influences in one way or another way. But with the introduction of the advanced program and the import of the foreign curriculum, sometimes without adequate adaptation and localization, so Vietnam was sort of on the path to be recolonized again. And very interesting to see the political modules being introduced into the advanced program, including the Marxism, Leninism, Ho Chi Minh thoughts, and the historical and approaches of the Communist Party in Vietnam. And in our research, there have been a lot of ideological clashes between the Vietnamese and Western political ideologies within the advanced curriculum. I should end here, but one of the key milestones for Vietnam is the introduction of đổi mới, which is economic and social reform initiated in 1986, and which marked the transition of the country from a centrally planned, subsidized socialist country to a socialist-oriented multiple sector market economy. And the curriculum reflected that dual orientation of capitalism and socialism. And within that context, the role of the Communist Party and the academic board at university is to filter for the appropriation of foreign influences in Vietnam using communist and Confucian values that we reported in a couple of publications. And despite the challenges, our empirical evidence shows that academics and students appreciate to some extent the coexistence of both the socialist and capitalist ideology in the curriculum. And one of the key arguments underlying that is how it can assist students with the development of multiple frame of references, There's a range of issues of access and equity and sustainability for the advanced program, but I think I'll leave it for the discussion. Perhaps I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ly Tran, for this very interesting case of how geopolitical dimensions of internationalization curriculum in Vietnam has shaped over the time, and how this might create both challenges but also opportunities for multiple frames. Betty, the floor is yours for the concluding remarks before we go into discussion.
Okay, so I just wanted to start by saying that in my role as co-editor of the book and as an author of a number of chapters with co-authors, it was really important for us to get a range of broad perspectives from people with very different both experiences of internationalization, but also experiences of curriculum and internationalization. In the last 10 years, of course, the complete, the development of international higher education, its understandings and its practices has been immense. And I think that if we understand that the more prominent place of the curriculum in that 10 years has led to, I think, some significant changes. And we've heard of some of those from today's speakers. There are many more in the book. And I think an increasing understanding that all students and student learning is really important if we want to advance international higher education for the global common good, which is, I think we've coalesced around that as a primary reason for internationalizing higher education. And certainly the events of the last few weeks, also the pandemic, also the sticky problems that the world faces that we haven't solved in terms of refugees, wars, hunger, inequalities, all of those things make that work much more important. But to make changes to the world, we actually have to make changes to the way people think and the way people act. And that for the future is really important for, it's really important to focus on student learning to ensure that we do that for the future. So I do have one slide, because what I've been working on for the last 12 months or so and thinking about a lot recently is, what does this new focus, this emerging paradigm of curriculum internationalization look like? And how might we use that description of this phenomenon that I see as having happened to advance it further and to assist the further advancement of international higher education over the next decade? So I will just share my screen. And can you see that slide now? Yes?
Yep.
Now, I can get rid of all of these. Sorry. I can't see half of my screen for all of the little things that are over the top of it. I'll just reduce this. So we see, I think, the following 8 characteristics of an emerging paradigm of internationalization of the curriculum. The first most important one is that an internationalized curriculum is important for all students. And so we've moved away, I think, a lot from this notion of mobility as being the only or the main way in which we internationalize, because there's that recognition that that's for a minority of students in the privileged world, if you like, and even smaller minority in those countries that are less resourced and from which students are less able to travel and experience mobility. So we see that focus on not just the mobile minority, and that means we have to think about what students do and how we teach and the experiences they have at home much more clearly and in a much more focused way. I think also in parallel with this, we've seen not only in international higher education, but in higher education more generally, a much stronger focus on exploring what curriculum means in educational terms. So in the school sector, curriculum has been an area of study for many decades. In higher education, it hasn't been such a focus. So we've had many more research projects in the last decade around what the curriculum in higher education looks like and its component parts, and understanding it as a system where a number of different aspects work together to create an experience and also to influence learning outcomes of students. So we understand it now much more as not just knowledge and a syllabus, but pedagogy, engagement, assessment, outcomes, impact, but also the formal curriculum as being related to, but also distinct from the informal curriculum, the extracurricular activities, and the hidden curriculum, and how those all fit together as part of that bigger system, which is the higher education institution, its policies and strategies. So we start to see some complexity and some understanding of complexity and exploration of complexity in the last decade, including specifically in relation to internationalization, which of course I've been involved in, but so have Wendy, Tracy and Ly and others in other parts of the world. So this has become almost an international community of practice where we're looking at some of these complex issues in different ways and all adding to the knowledge that we have. I think the third thing we see is the intercultural has come to the fore, and that's in part because we're thinking more about all students and the home situation and the intercultural being everywhere, and seeing that as being the focus as being about interculturalization and internationalization of the curriculum as being related, but in some ways different, and the intercultural being in some ways perhaps more important if we're thinking about all students rather than a mobile minority. We're seeing, I think, an increased understanding of the contextually sensitive nature of curriculum internationalization. My work focused a lot on the different discipline perspectives, but I think also the conversation and the work that we just heard about from Ly around the geopolitical context of the nation and the institution is also really important to internationalizing the curriculum. So that was, her work has been extremely important in that area. I think we're also seeing a recognition that curriculum internationalization can be actually a focus for ongoing curriculum improvement, ongoing improvement of teaching and learning through kind of an action research process where we make changes. We do that with the support of, for example, communities of practice, as we heard Tracy talking about. We look at the impact of those changes on students, on learning, and we continue that process over time because the world is changing and therefore what we teach and how we teach needs to change. And I think we've seen in this through the pandemic an increased understanding that we can use a broader range of tools to work with students to interculturalize and internationalize their learning. I'll talk about that a bit more in number 7. I want to now just highlight the fact that I think we are seeing an increased understanding that this is not a values neutral space that we work in, that we are focused on some global issues, that we're focused on cooperation, collaboration, the development of global citizenship, of the global common good, we're seeing people focusing on cognitive justice, decolonization of the curriculum as pathways to internationalizing the curriculum. The Sustainable Development Goals also being a focus of some areas of internationalization of the curriculum. So that idea of we're looking to the future with an understanding of the present and of the past. The seventh, I think, characteristic of this emerging paradigm is that it's very focused on active and experiential learning. In some ways, this was always a focus of internationalization of the curriculum, of the mobility experience, but this is really a focus on active experiential learning at home, in classrooms, working with people from different cultures, on campus, doing the same, in the community, connecting with community groups, thinking about virtual exchange, online, as well as face-to-face. So we're seeing a broader range of tools and engagements, I think, as a focus. Finally, I think we're seeing an increased recognition of the need to really base everything we do on the professional expertise of a wide range of people in the institution. The academic developers working collaboratively with staff, with teaching staff, but also people in the research areas across disciplines, bringing in their knowledge, and people in the international office, people in the community, etc. So that notion that this is very important and thinking work that we're doing. It's not something that happens by accident. It's intellectual work as well as very practical work. So I'm going to finish there by saying that I think the pandemic has, and the actual situation in Europe at the moment, has really made this work much more important if we think about the work that we do. And I'm encouraged by these emerging characteristics that I think are becoming a focus of increased research, but also becoming more embedded in practice. So I'll finish there because I think we're down to 10 minutes for questions now, Hans.
Yeah, thank you. Keep this on maybe for the moment, because I haven't seen any question in the chat or the Q&A. So if you want, just do that or raise your hand. But in the meantime, maybe what we could do is ask the other panelists to reflect on those characteristics and to say, well, are we missing something, or are you disagreeing with something that Betty has said, or do you want to add to that? And maybe I can start with Ly, because I know that Ly has to leave a little bit earlier because she has an important board meeting to attend. Maybe just reflect on that also from your experience and your work that you have been doing.
Yeah, so can I just clarify, would you like me to reflect on the 8 points that Betty just mentioned now?
Or
Yeah.
anyone, Ly.
Yeah, okay. Anyone if you want to add.
Why not? Yeah, sure. Yeah, great. Yeah. I think Betty just raised all the core points here for us to consider, and certainly the number 7 is the one that I'd like to touch on a little, given the complexity of internationalization in diverse contexts. Now, for instance, with innovative offshore programs, so not just internationalization at home or abroad, but the form of transnational models where countries like Vietnam, for instance, is the first country in Asia that make a very brave move and announced last year that it allows Vietnamese university to partner with foreign university in order to deliver fully online programs, which is really interesting. Like partnership between Vietnamese university and foreign universities is not new, but the acceptance of fully online program in Vietnam is a really brave move. And so that lead to the notion of online international student at home, and what is the implication for the internationalization of the curriculum in terms of appropriating the foreign content into the context of Vietnam, but also in terms of navigating the boundary between online and face-to-face and hybrid model, and also between formal and informal learning at home. And another thing is the encouragement of digital technologies in delivering offshore program, and what is the implication for internationalization of the curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's an important aspect that sometimes is forgotten about the whole, how we deal with online and how we deal with, like say, the whole offshore cross-border delivery of education in this context. So, Tracy, you want to add something from your perspective?
Yeah, actually, I really love these 8 points. I'm immediately attracted by point number 6, values-driven and future-focused. In our work in Hong Kong, we found that with faculty members, a relatively simple conception of internationalization of the curriculum focused a lot on the content and skills. So developing globally ready skills or letting students know all the practice around the world would be sufficiently internationalized, but only the very sophisticated conceptions consider values driven, and that immediately touch students' heart. You know, in Hong Kong, young people are struggling with their identity, their relationship with neighbors, with other youth in the world. So I do think a promising future for IOC is to look at values and how we develop them among our students.
Thank you. That, yeah,
Thank you.
I agree. That's a very important point, and it is, in my view, it's, by the way, the most complex of the whole thing. Is values contextualized, or are there common values, and how do you define the balance between them? That's so values driven sounds nice, but you have also to be saying, well, are there something like we have generally common values? Some people say that, and then they say, well, yeah, but that's a Western defined of common values, and are there other values which are different? It's a complicated issue, but I think it's a very important issue to address also in this whole context. So thank you for that.
And we have a question in the Q&A at 2 now.
2 now, okay, that's very good. But I still briefly want to give Wendy also the chance to comment before, and then I will give the possibility to our 2 questions. Wendy, briefly, and then.
Okay, thanks, Hans. Thank you, Betty. I think the work that you've been doing in the last 12 months is extremely important and valuable. So firstly, thank you. I know, I can imagine what a difficult and ongoing task this is, but I think it's really important. I think all of your characteristics seem true to me and resonate strongly. Some of them I find a little bit, you know, have really engaged me a little bit further, and I'd just like to make some comments. The first one is the intercultural and international. I absolutely agree, and I think it's been a very good thing to see the intercultural come to the fore. I'm thinking also, if we step back from international education and in fact from higher education as a system and look at the bigger picture though, I see international education really as it was has been conceptualized, came out of the 20th century and the World War and the aftermath of the World War, and a real concern to reframe the relations between nations and the role education could play in that. I think more recently there's been, and I think this is still really important, and we absolutely can see that with the current situation in Europe as one awful example, that this work still is very important, and it's important to think about these problematic. But at the same time, more recently, we've seen a different conceptualization, and that is a more global system, and nations as artificial borders. And I think the pandemic and the climate crisis is really bringing this home. So right now, I think that we are sitting, you know, in the middle of these two paradigms. They're running parallel, they're in conflict, but higher education and international higher education is part of that, and that ideological kind of a clash at the moment. And so I think the way we conceptualize international education is going to be very much influenced in the way these two paradigms play out. And I think, you know, right now we need to be recognizing the complexity of that ideological clash. Yeah, and the second one, I just think around number 8. Yes, I think communities of practice are really important, and the recognition of looking more broadly for expertise. But I'm wondering, and my work and Tracy's around communities of practice and students as partners really is positioning these actors as co-agents. So I think maybe there's some kind of conceptualizing emerging where co-agency, the sort of co-ownership, co-responsibility of international education belongs to everybody, every stakeholder in a university, which again brings us back to that idea of curriculum as a system. Yeah, so I think that they're my two kind of responses, not very clear at the moment, but this is why I think your work is so very important, is that it is engaging us in this really important conversation across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you. We have now 3 questions from the participants, Peng Sang, Natalia Timus, and Susan Jagendorf. So yes, I think the first 2 are pretty much related. So that's about faculty motivation and faculty engagement, faculty development. So the question of Peng Sang is, I have a question on faculty motivation and engaging internationalization of the curriculum. Do you have practical tips on how to help faculty to buy in the value of internationalization curriculum? And Natalia says, well, how do you think faculty development can support the internationalization curriculum and development of a global competence? Can you address those 2 issues, and who would like to start to address that?
I'm happy to just very quickly start, but I think Tracy is also really qualified to answer this. I was just start by briefly saying, I think it's never useful to go to faculty to say that I have something here. Here's a development program for you. You know, I need to. We need to. You know, get you involved in this learning program. That the best thing is to start with understanding that they're probably already doing some things, and that you can build on those. And that sense of working in partnership, again, going back to that notion of recognizing that people are doing many things that we don't know about, but we're equals in a way, and we can work together. I bring my expertise, you bring yours, we put it together. The sum total is much better. And connecting them with people is is much better place to start. So I did start in a lot of my work with a kind of audit of, you know, if we see internationalization of the curriculum like this, and you might start with these characteristics perhaps, then what are you doing in this space? Because I'm sure you're doing something really good. And how can we share that with other people and get you together so that we can all learn more, bringing faculty together and faculty developers, but positioning people as equal partners is my advice. Tracy.
Thank you, Betty. Yeah, thank you. In fact, I found both intrinsic and extrinsic motivations are necessary. Intrinsically, Betty has mentioned a lot, speaking to them, partnering with them. Yeah, that works a lot, especially, actually, our work in Hong Kong is a lot inspired by Wendy and Betty's work. So we work closely with disciplinary expertise. Academics are so proud and attached to their discipline. So if you speak to them, hoping to connect to the discipline, as the question we often ask, what do you think is a good global citizen in your discipline as a journalist, as a surveyor, as an architect? And that's speaking immediately arousing the intrinsic motivation. But our survey shows that many faculty members still feel that their efforts in this work are not really valued yet by their institution. But some institutions have put in place small scale teacher learning funding or like fellowship funding, which are also quite motivating. So I still feel basically intrinsic and extrinsic need to be in place at the same time. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And although I'm pretty sure that Wendy has a lot to say about this as well, because she has been working on faculty development and faculty engagement, time doesn't allow us, but I want just briefly to give a chance to maybe Betty to answer the question by Susan about where does diversity, equity and inclusion fit in this paradigm, before I give the floor to John to close off.
So I think it's there in a number of places, Susan. I think it's there in the notion of curriculum as a system and in pedagogy as well. Diversity is a great tool and for learning. It is about the skills of teachers to navigate that space and to get students working together and understanding each other and their ability to facilitate those sorts of conversations. But I think it's also an outcome. You know, there's a sense of we need to understand diversity as part of the cultural landscape. So thinking about culture as much as a very broad concept, you look at diversity in your classroom and see that there's a range of diversity, even if they were all, for example, born in Australia or born in Canada or born in China. There may well be much diversity in terms of their physical characteristics, their physical abilities, and equity is part of, I think, the whole piece. We want all students to have an equal opportunity to experience a range of important experiences or learning opportunities at university, and inclusion also. So I think they're there. They're not overtaken by it, and they shouldn't be. These things are important agendas for institutions to pursue in other ways, but I think that they can be, they are visible in some of those characteristics very clearly.
Okay, thank you. And unfortunately, time is coming to an end. I want you to look at Natalia Timmer's message in the chat, in particular if you're teaching in US or European higher education, and survey she refers to. I would like to thank the panel. I give the final words to John from Stylus to close off this panel. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Hans. Thank you, Betty. Thank you, Wendy, Tracy, and Lee, for sharing all your expertise and for your time. And I also want to thank everybody who's joined us, whatever time zone they happen to be in. if you're interested in ordering the handbook, I have placed in the chat a document that gives you information about how to order it, whether you're in North America or outside. So let me just. Oh, can you stop? I think Wendy. Sorry.
Betty.
Oh, stop sharing. Yes.
Yeah, can you stop sharing? Okay.
Yes, I will.
No problem.
Yeah.
So, where are we? Oh, I've now lost. No, for some reason I've now lost the slide that I had in the. Okay, well let's rather than taking up more time, in the chat I've placed a document where if you're in the North America, you can order the book and get to 25% discount and free shipping. I've also provided the link to our overseas distributors, so you can get the same deal from them. So I'll just let you know that we'll so that the code is there and the links to where you can order from. The webinar video will be available by Friday and shared on our social media feeds. And you also find the feeds, the 2 previous webinars that preceded this one. All webinar registrants will get a direct email with these links, as well as the discount code. And I want to thank you for joining us, and I want to thank the participants once again. I will keep the session going until the last person has departed and managed to either copy matters from the chat or whatever. So well, thank you very much, and wish you the best.
Thank you all, and
thank you, John, and thank you for publishing the book.
Oh, yeah. It's been a very exciting project. I must say, both reading the book and listening to your sessions, a lot of interesting things I've picked up. I'm really intrigued by the kind of student participation, the decolonization issues, and the fact that we're now looking at, I think international education was very much a north-south thing. It's now a south-south and a south-north thing, where we're using lots of different lenses and approaching these issues from lots of different perspectives. So I'm very excited.
Thank you. And I understand that there's a lot of interest in the handbook as well.
Yes, indeed. It started off very well.
That's good.
We had a launch at the AIEA conference. Was it last week or the week before? And I think we sold out the copies we brought. So yeah,
that's good.
It's been exciting.
All that work that so many people put in was just in extraordinary times. Yeah,
well, I also appreciate the fact that most of you had to rewrite your chapters in the light of COVID, right? So the book was delayed for a very good reason. We had to change recognize the changed circumstances in which we find ourselves.
Yeah,
absolutely. I think in 5 years, when there will be a 3rd edition, things have been changed completely again. But I will not be part of that. Okay.
Okay.
Time for new editors.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone. Great to see you.
Okay. Thank you.